Throughout this class, we have studied how vampire narratives have reflected the fears and concerns of the societies that told and retold them. Societies are made up of people, of individuals and groups who have different perspectives on those same fears, or even fears that are unique to their specific group. In particular, the relationship between women and vampires has ranged from victim to associate to lover. Over the centuries, women's place in society and their accompanying fears and priorities have changed the narrative from the nightmarish terror of Bram Stroker's work to 2025's Booktok shadow daddies. The cultural narrative behind this shift is the subject of this work and the source of both confusion and conversation between two vampires meeting up for a drink. She covered her mouth as she chuckled in amusement at him. Hiding her fangs was just habit by now, but he had taken things to a whole new level. Whoever did he think he was fooling with the ball cap and dark sunglasses? She watched in amusement as heads turned, and one woman bit her lips as she all but drooled at him walking past. He still had that same sense of menace about him that he'd always had, but the reactions to it sure had changed. He sat down, his grumble almost a growl as he slid a battered book across the table to her. Here, I added notes to it. It still makes no sense to me. How did things get this way? She smoothed the rough cover and gently opened the pages yellowed with age. She sighed. We spent eons as the monsters in the dark. They believed that we were pure evil, and they were the light, and goodness would prevail. Nothing seems so black and white anymore. Running her fingers over the sketch of an Assyrian woman, she translated the cuneiform without difficulty and read aloud. I saw her today, but she called me cursed. To her I am the Ekamu. I am become the nightmare, the undead, to be feared and hated. At least there are the offerings. Rare meat isn't as nice as fresh blood, but the wines are delicious. He snorted. They thought burying someone incorrectly caused us to rise as vengeful spirits, as if it were so easy to create a vampire. They were so afraid of offending the spirits and the gods that she had to sit at the temple and offer her body to anyone who wished to make use of her, the same way those offerings of meat and wine were to appease us. With a wince, she remembered the women at the temple, first bound in arranged marriages and then sent to serve their goddess. The world seemed so big to them, so many mysteries, so much for them to fear. She turned. Careful to avoid damaging the painted illumination, she read his entry. The vampire hunter came today. They say I lure young women to the woods, and 9 months later they give birth to stillborn monsters. The women blame a vampire for seduction and the loss of a child, or face burning at the stake as a witch. Many small graves dot the countryside, and they look for someone to blame. She paused in painful recollection. Children were never ours to bear, but I think that made them more precious to me. Being blamed for their deaths was awful. She saw him start to snarl some angry retort, but a child's laughter floated across the room from the open door, and he paused. I would not wish loss like that on anyone, and that was just the beginning of the witch burnings and blaming women for stillborn babies. She winced and nodded. Red ink smeared down the side of the page like blood, and she shuddered as she remembered the town on the map. For a time I stayed with her, she read. Mortal lifespans are so short, and I died rather than raise suspicions. I missed her, but going back was a mistake. I'd hoped to make sure she was not facing a witchcraft trial. As a midwife, she risked it even more than most women. Now there are cries of rape, and the same men that would have burned her at the stake if another mother struggled in birth or had her milk dry up are the ones she turns to as holy priests to save her from the demon I am. She shuddered as she remembered the hunts that followed, and the scent of burned flesh as they accused and executed those they found guilty of demonic association or witchcraft. It was bad then, he murmured softly. Men needed heirs, families depended on children, yet pregnancy was a risk and birth was a struggle. Many times the midwife was blamed for loss that they could not understand. Even more, the aged women with no children of their own, that have no one to take care of you, was unimaginable. So they blamed us for spreading evil, and the women were burned as witches. After turning the page, she smoothed down the curled edges of the handwritten check he tucked into the book. $25 was so much, especially so soon after the Great Depression. The fight for suffrage was just getting off the ground, though married women were still very restricted. More were staying single for the freedom. What was it, about 3/4 or so? He asked. Yes, it wasn't easy, but they were choosing those fairer sex, appropriate jobs, rather than be forced into the role of a housebound wife. Remember the vampire? Not only were they starting to doubt that whole a man's word is his honor bit, but many women's greatest fear was being forced into marriage and losing control of their own lives, like what happened to those imaginary brides of Dracula. She heard his sigh as she turned her attention back to the journal and read what he'd written 2 centuries before. I read a new novel today. An Irish author named Stroker called it Dracula. The press called it horror, but it seems fuller of lust than violence. A young man far from his hometown love becomes mysteriously besotted by 3 beautiful women, who have to have been vampires, of course. And the lady victim, who is too mind-controlled to know her own decisions, must be rescued from her delusions by men who save her and set her up for marriage. It seems so transparent to me to see their fear that women may possibly just might maybe know their own minds and wants. But no, it must be us monsters mind controlling them. It wasn't long after that when I read the first story where we had become a type of hero, he mused, and turned the page. You've always been such a reader. I remember when you sent me these books, though I confess I watched the show first. 10 years ago today, the birth control pill was improved. 200 years ago today, I watched a woman burn because she was branded a witch after a noble's wife failed to get pregnant season after season. The news reported that a man was arrested for beating his wife today. It wasn't that long ago when everyone assumed it was his right to do so. The newest Dark Shadows episode aired, and again, the vampire chose to free the woman rather than keep her captive or force her to his will. The stories were written by a woman, and the monster is not me. He chuckled. I was surprised to see the vampire as almost a hero, not because he was by nature, but by choosing to help the lady and then choosing to leave or turn her away rather than turn her into a vampire or corrupt her. I found out a few years after they were actually written by a man writing under a woman's pseudonym. That was a surprising bit of role reversal. Yes, I think the turn of the century could be called the what-if ages. The internet was opening up communication in an unprecedented way. And when people talk, things can change quickly. It was like shining a sudden light in a cave of bats. All kinds of things came flying out of the darkness of isolation and silence. And humanity has always been afraid of things that come from the dark. As she turns the page, a stuffed-in copy of the Watcher's Guide to Buffy the Vampire Slayer slides loose. She raises an eyebrow at him as she slides it back into the book. He starts to blush, then sighs and shrugs. It was the 90s. Yeah, I remember the hair. It was harder being a woman then, though. I saw it too. The pushback as the second generation of feminists grew to adulthood was harsh. Remember how sexualized advertisements became? There was even a movie titled Whore. It showed in the stories about us too. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, okay, she did do some slaying, but also loving, kissing, dating, friendshipping, and laughing. He waved at her to stop. It was funny sometimes, yes, but it really showed society shifting too. A young female warrior? It'd been so long since such a thing was praised. She faced the temptation to become all-powerful and chose not to. She faced a choice of a mate and chose to walk away rather than compromise her principles. We never did find out the long-term consequences of her choices, but that's often how it is. She looked down and read. I heard a song today with lyrics that went, 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Nobody gets too far like that. It seems that humans find this to be instructions rather than caution. They are so afraid of what the future may hold that they are backpedaling in some ways, particularly in matters of control. Use technology to exploit the body? Yes. But should they make the choice to use it to recognize equality? Or to revert to the strict control of the old ways? That freedom of choice, that is the true terror in the night. Ashton groaned as she turned the page in his journal. Sparkly vampires. What? Why? He laughed at her scrunched nose and disgruntled tone. The books were better than the movie, but I get your point. It was easier to see how they viewed us in the books when I wasn't so distracted by glitter. I'm skeptical. They're teens, but growing up in a world that has changed so much from what their parents grew up in and knew. She interrupted. Their world changed? Huh! Should see what it was like when I was growing up. He laughed. That is a rather more extended timeline. But for them, these short years changed so much. Women were losing ground right and left with anti-abortion judgments, Miss Clinton's withdrawal from the presidential race, and the rollback of the Title IX protections. Even that poor Miss Spears and her meltdown society judged her so harshly for. It wasn't until years later that people began to reconsider their sneering derision. The older generation insisted women's place was in the home, being traditional wives and mothers. Those young ladies weren't willing to go back in the cage. They were afraid of becoming what their parents had been. They wanted different choices, and different can be terrifying. True enough. It was about then that Plan B became available to them too, wasn't it? So even more self-determination. Something generations before could have never imagined having. She slid her fingers across the page, reading his notes. Sparkling? Where in the world did that come from? A vampire who can choose to hurt or not. A woman who can choose to love. But only if they're willing to risk turning against what everyone else tells them to do and trying a different path. And continued reading. Vampires openly in society and accepted that way? Well, mostly accepted. Bram Stroker couldn't imagine this is where vampire stories would lead. I watched the Me Too march today, as women made a public statement about how much violence is hidden in normal society. Change keeps coming quickly now, and the internet is fast becoming a powerful tool for it to happen. You know, I wonder if it's those same teenagers who grew up with Buffy and Twilight learning to push back against their elders. Was it them who wrote that True Blood show? I don't know, but it's certainly possible. The idea of us living openly with humans like that certainly was interesting. Its authors certainly kept the juicy bits of humans for us. I remember the first time I saw Sookie run to a vampire for help and call him to safety. It was from another vampire, but still. I remember these marches, she said, running her hands over the photos tucked into his journal. Home has always been dangerous for women, but it wasn't until the internet that the depth and breadth of that danger really became apparent. He nodded thoughtfully. He'd long since stopped feeling guilt over his needs. but that once human part of him still felt an odd bit of connection to men and their role in all of this. In a way, it was actually Stroker's vampire all over, just in prettier packaging. How so? Well, they've always blamed us for being the monsters they were afraid of. But they're no longer afraid of something as obvious as a hideous beast. Now society, and women in particular, are afraid of the monsters who don't look like monsters at all. Pointing towards the True Blood picture, he added, it wasn't just individual monsters anymore either, but the imbalance of power between women and men, vampires, and their position being used against them. She sighed, and her shoulders drooped as the heavy thoughts sunk in. It's hard to imagine that, being so afraid of everything and having to be so on guard nonstop. Turn the page. She laughed at first as she turned the page and saw the Shadow Daddy ranking system. Oh, ho, the Shadow Daddies of today. What a change! A few years ago, could you imagine going from hiding in the darkest places to, well, needing to wear that silly hat and sunglasses to avoid being chased by women as a tall, dark, handsome, and deadly? He chuckled and answered, even if they do guess what we are now, they don't run. I think I almost feel bad that we're safer. Well, at least we're in known danger. We're not going to kill you. It's much more efficient to keep you around and tasty. I feel a little like the bear the women would choose when alone in the woods. She looked down and began reading what he'd written recently. It feels like a world gone mad, but angry mad, not crazy mad. The internet has made it easy for victims to speak out and be heard, even when their voices are cut short in death. A black man was murdered and the whole world rioted. Years ago, the torches and pitchforks would have been after me. Today, they have to face the fact that their own police force is far more dangerous to them than I ever was. The lockdowns over the COVID virus continue, but as women are stepping up into places of political power, it's drawing attention to many who have gone silent, being trapped in their homes. Their stories have vampires choosing to fight oppression. I wonder if they realize why. Violence begets violence, except when it doesn't. The vampire stories today aren't about us as the monsters. Instead, the ones women are writing are about being strong enough to not be afraid, about precise justice rather than heavy-handed vengeance. Oh, I see you read the newest Broadbent book too. Even I was a bit surprised with this one. I mean, yes, there's another tall, dark, and handsome vampire to fall in love with, but turning and going through this entire empathetic journey of understanding what it means to be a vampire and how that changes her world. He nodded. In a world that seems to grow openly crueler and crueler, especially towards women, to see a heroine become powerful through her empathy was definitely a critique of society. She sighed as she read the headline about the backlash against women's rights. Is it odd that I wish it wasn't like this? No, we have watched them for a long time. I see it now, though, the change. Ages ago, the unknown was the monster, and safety was home and religion and the familiar. It's still freedom from fear they want, but the unknown isn't the shadows and the dark. The unknown is the systems that oppress, and the society that seems determined to keep them caged. The unknown is what happens if they never break free of that cage, or what might happen if they do. Yes, and you know what's interesting? In the stories they tell now, we represent the potential of violence, but also the potential for strength. And like in this book, he said as he taps the bookmark, the violence is targeted, precise, controlled. It's not random, and it's not without thought for its consequences. True. How so strength? Do you mean women wanting to become vampires? In a way, but not always. It's the strength to be free from fear. Think how many reminders there are of woman's safety in this very bar. Warnings to watch your drink so a stranger cannot contaminate it. Signs in the bathroom with numbers to call in case she's not safe at home. Ways to message the bartender that you need help without a date knowing. Taxi numbers who have drivers that won't harass or molest. Oof, that is a lot. Or it should be a lot. But I guess it really isn't. I agree. They long for the freedom to be strong enough to not be afraid for themselves, and for a partner in a package where violence is a choice, and his protectiveness doesn't stop at the door to the guy's locker room. They fear the choices humans make, which turn them into the monsters.